Hey guys, my name is Matsumo, and today I decided to go back and played some Battlefield Bad Company 2. The reason I went back and played is because Carl Magnus, a DICE employee, talked to Eurogamer and explained that they're not really sure why Bad Company 2, or the Bad Company series, was as successful as it was. They had their creative vision, they knew that they were creating a good game, they just don't know why everyone loved it as much as they did. And so, first of all, this is just hilarious. Like, you would think a developer would have an idea as to why their game was so much fun, but it also does make sense. Like, they had their creative vision, they brought it out there to the consumers, and at that point, it's up to the consumers to know if they liked it or not. And so for today, I thought it'd be fun to explore why Bad Company 2 was so amazing. Like, for me, Bad Company was one of my favorite Battlefield titles of all time. It did things very, very well. It did have its flaws, but it truly was an amazing title. And the first thing that I think it really came down to is that when Bad Company 2 first came out, not only was it innovative, but it just brought a breath of fresh air to the first-person shooter scene. Like, there were not a lot of games out there that had this type of destruction. Like, you shoot an RPG at a wall in this game, it's gonna crumble down to the ground. And not a lot of games could say that that was the amount of dynamic environments that they had. Like, there were a couple in the past, but they were nowhere near as polished or as fun as the multiplayer was for Bad Company 2. And so when people first saw the game and they first jumped into it, and this was probably one of the first Battlefield titles, nostalgia is probably playing a large role into it. Like, when you had your very first ice cream, it may not have been the best ice cream or the most delicious ice cream on the market, but hot damn, when you took your first bite, it was delicious. And I think that's what happened with Bad Company 2. It was their first Battlefield title, it was innovative, it was a breath of fresh air, it wasn't Call of Duty. Like, back then, I know a lot of people were looking for something a little bit than Call of Duty, they were looking for a first-person shooter that was a little bit different, and then Bad Company 2 swooped on in and was there to deliver. The other thing I think it came down to was simply just the map design. Like, these were some of the best maps I played in first-person shooters overall, not only for the Battlefield franchise, but for all video games in general. Like, they had some of the most memorable and amazing maps to date. Like, they were simply fantastic. And one of the things that they really focused on was Rush. Something that we don't have in Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 is that while Rush sure is a game mode, it's nowhere near as good as it was back in Bad Company 2. Like, DICE created maps that were solely designed around Rush. Like, actually, I would say a majority of the maps were designed around Rush. They did go in and give us Conquest versions of these maps, and so if you were a Conquest player, that was still available and you had plenty of maps with those game modes, but Rush was the centerpiece, at least in my mind, and because of that, you just had some of the best maps and the best gameplay experience you could have for that mode in any Battlefield title. They flowed well, there was this great give and take between the offense and defensive team. You could actually win as the offense on a lot of these maps. It didn't feel impossible like it would be in Battlefield 3, or even especially in Battlefield 4. Like, the maps were just simply fantastic, and the gameplay reflected that. Another thing I appreciated about the game is that customization, especially when it comes to gadgets and class dynamic, is nowhere near as bloated as it is right now. If you play as the medic in Bad Company 2, you're playing as a medic. Like, you have a wide variety of light machine guns to choose from. Like, there were still plenty of weapons. There was a couple of customization options. You could change a couple of things on those guns. But for the most part, if you're playing as a medic, you had a med bag and you had a defibrillator. And those were your gadgets. You had to use them, you had to be a team player, and sure, you could lone wolf it, but it was way more beneficial not only for you if you wanted to get a lot of points, but also just for your team to lay down ammo bags and to revive your teammates. And this was also true for all of the classes. Like, there was some variety of the gadgets that you could use for the engineer. For example, you could use the RPG or the Carl Gustav, the infamous Carl Gustav. But if you're playing as the engineer, you were playing as that role. If you were playing as the medic, you were playing as the medic, and that was basically forced upon you by the gadgets that were available. And because of that, I would say that the class dynamic and the class cohesion was far superior in Bad Company 2. Like, you had to rely on your teammates to get the job done. You could lone wolf it, you could go that playstyle, and I know a lot of people did that, but if you wanted to win the round, and if you just wanted a lot of points, working with your team was the best way to do that. And so, just class dynamic and cohesion, in my opinion, was far superior back in Bad Company 2. One problem that stems from this bloating and wide variety of gadgets that we have right now in the current Battlefield titles is that while sure, it gives us a lot of options on how we want to play the game, it also makes it very difficult to balance out all of those gadgets. Some are very popular, some are almost useless, no one ever uses them, but it also brings a lot of unpredictability and randomness to the game. Like if you're playing literally any game mode, you can die from mortars, you can die from a UCAV, you can get shot by an M320, an RPG can fly at you, or a million different varieties of RPGs can fly at you. Like there are so many things in this game that can take you out, and a lot of it is completely random and completely unpredictable. Like there is no way for you to know that a UCAV is about to fly right in your face. And the first time that happened to me, I was like, God damn it, this is like one of the worst additions in the game. Granted, DICE did nerf it. They did make it so that you couldn't replenish it by an ammo bag, or it would take like a day and a half for it to replenish. But if you die to a UCAV, it sucks. It is not a fun experience because there is almost nothing you can do to avoid it at all. Like if you are playing on Gold Mud Railways, you're trying to push up onto an objective, you're out in the open, you don't see anyone around you, you assume you're safe, but all of a sudden you get smacked in the face by a UCAV and there's nothing you could do about that. There's a lot of gadgets that are completely like that. The mortar is another great example. You're playing on Rush, you get taken out by a mortar, it's like, well, great. I'm glad I was out in the open, you know, because there's no other cover here and it was able to kill me. Like that's not fun. And because there's so many different ways for people to kill you in this game, it causes randomness and it causes a lot of frustration. And back in Bad Company 2, it did have its problems with some randomness. Like there were a lot of problems with explosive devices. They had a perk in there that actually made explosive devices better, and the Carl Gustav was ran around as a primary. I know that sounds terrible, and it was. People were basically using a RPG as a primary weapon, and it was terrible, but at the same time, it's nowhere near as bad as the randomness and the ways that you can die in Battlefield 4. And I think it's just because of that bloating. I think it's just simply because there's so many gadgets in the game. Well, sure, it brings a wide variety of gameplays to the scene. It also just causes so much frustration because there's just a million different ways you can die in the game, and when you're dying unpredictably and you're dying randomly, it doesn't make for the best gameplay experience. And then the last thing on my list, of course, has to go to the gunplay. It would not matter how well balanced your maps are, it would not matter how fun your game modes are, if the gunplay itself sucks, your first-person shooter sucks, and that was not the case with Bad Company 2. The weapons were a lot of fun to use, and I actually really liked the dynamic between all of the classes and the way that the guns differed between all of the classes. If you played as the engineer, for example, your weapons dominated up close. Like, they hit the hardest in close encounter combat. Like, if you go toe-to-toe with someone who's using an assault rifle, you had an inherent advantage as long as you were within about 10 meters from them. Like, they were the best weapons for that type of combat. But then if you switch on over to the assault class, you had weapons that performed well in every single type of combat scenario. Like, if you wanted to do well, you wanted to use some of the best weapons in the game, playing as the assault was one way to go about it. The medic's weapons were very powerful as well. I would actually say that their light machine guns were better compared to the modern Battlefield titles. They had a lot of ammunition. They didn't hit as hard as the assault or as the engineer weapons in their respective categories, but they were still amazingly fun to use. And so the fact that the weapons were not only just a blast to use, but they were also different between all of the classes. Like, if you played as the engineer, the playstyle and the weapons performed far different than if you're playing as the medic or the assault class. And it was that variety, it was that different type of playstyle that made Bad Company 2 so enjoyable. And so overall, while I would not say that this is the extensive list as to why Bad Company 2 was successful, I do think that these were some of the major points. People look back on it fondly because of nostalgia. This was one of their favorite Battlefield titles because it was their first Battlefield title. It was innovative at the time. It brought something new to the scene that no one's really seen before with the massive amount of destruction, so people really got into that. But it also had some of the best map design in the industry. Like, some of these maps were, to this day, like, I still think fondly on Valparaiso. I still think fondly on a lot of these maps because they were so well designed. You bring in dynamic team-oriented gameplay. You make it so if someone dies in the title, it doesn't feel random. They can identify why they died, and if they played it a little bit differently or played it smarter, they could have avoided that death. They had great netcode. I didn't even mention the netcode. The netcode was solid, way better than what we have in Battlefield 4. And you bring all these factors together, and you have an amazing Battlefield title. But I'd love to know what you think about Bad Company 2. What factors did you appreciate most? What do you think made this game so successful? Let me know down below. But until tomorrow, guys, have a good one, and take it easy.